Welcome back to the modern mystic, where we fall asleep inside the quiet lives of history's greatest minds. Tonight, we linger in the gentle, quiet rhythm of Barack Obama's late-night writing, the quiet after applause, the pause after crowds. It's an evening spent walking gently beside him, long after headlines fade, as the gentle scrape of a pen meets the soft glow of lamplight. What if greatness was built in the stillest hours? What if change came from practiced silence more than any single moment? What if legacy is formed not in the light of day, but in the hush of a worn home office or a silent hotel room long after midnight? This isn't a story. It's a slow remembrance based entirely on real life, whispered softly as it happened. If you've ever felt slow, restless, or quietly uncertain of your own path, these late hours with Barack Obama will help you feel less alone and more understood as you drift. You don't have to finish this. Even if you sleep, the pace and memory will continue beneath your dreams. There's no need to keep up. Let your mind rest in the background as you listen and allow his quiet, nightly rituals to unfold within you. In Hawaii, when the air is humid and the mornings arrive in small, quiet layers, young Barack would wake to the gentle clatter of dishes in a wooden kitchen. The faint scent of rice from the night before lingered on the formica counters. His mother, Stanley Ann, moved softly through the space, her footsteps muffled against the faded linoleum. Every object seemed worn in: a wooden table, notebooks with rounded edges, a chipped mug waiting for tea. Outside the window, the sun glimmered on wet leaves, a stillness stretching across the yard. Growing up, the small apartment never felt crowded, but it was rich with presence. The hum of traffic below, the whisper of trade winds through half-opened curtains, these were the background music of his childhood. Before school, Barack would sometimes sit quietly while his mother reviewed homework or handed him a stack of papers to read. There was a kind of ritual to the slow morning preparation. School books, a light jacket, the careful tying of shoelaces, all of it unhurried. There was always time to pause, even if just for a breath or for the sound of rain brushing against window panes. Anne rarely rushed. She believed that careful attention was its own kind of love. Mornings with her felt spacious, edged with reminders that beginnings can be slow and strength can grow in silence. She moved like someone who trusted that small details matter: a pressed shirt, a handwritten note tucked into a lunchbox. In these actions, Barack learned how simple gestures carry meaning that words can't hold. He watched and absorbed, surprised at how a life could feel both delicate and rooted. There were letters, always, in his mother's handwriting, shopping lists, gentle reminders, notes written on scraps of paper and left under his door. Even when she was studying late or working new jobs, there was comfort in the traces she left behind. Each note was a thread back to her, to the sense that he was seen. Paper carried her voice when she wasn't in the room. The texture of her script, sometimes smudged, sometimes precise, provided a quiet anchor as he moved through uncertain days. Sometimes early light would filter through the slats of the blinds, washing the walls in soft gold. On these mornings, Barack remembered the steady pulse of his mother's presence. She showed him how to meet the world gently, not with grand declarations, but with stillness and patience. Washing rice, folding laundry, tying loose strings on a knapsack, every task formed a pattern, a rhythm he could rely on. The doors of memory opened slowly, letting in the humid, scented air of childhood. Legacy begins not in a spotlight, but in a home where quiet repetition threads meaning into everything and nothing needed to be hurried. Even before the world asked more of him, there were these early rooms filled with the small sounds of care and the sacred boredom of growing up. A light rain brushed the windows of the Punahou apartment, the rhythmic sound tapping gently against the glass. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of rice and soy sauce from dinner cooling on the counter. The old table stood in the center, its surface marked by years of books and elbows, by the patient practice of handwriting night after night. Young Barak, head bent, traced out words in careful rows, pencil gripped between gentle fingers, pausing sometimes as though searching for the next idea just beyond reach. The lamp above cast a soft circle of light, leaving the corners in quiet shadow. In these ordinary spaces, something inside felt both belonging and apart, as if wandering through rooms filled with voices, yet always listening for a distant call. Years later, Barak would remember the confusion of mixed backgrounds, the fullness and the absence, the phone calls with his father, the slow walks beside his mother through campus pathways. Between footsteps on old concrete, the air was warm and thick, filled with the scent of plumeria and the hum of nearby traffic drifting in from the edge of evening. A gentle breeze brushed through the bedroom window, carrying with it the far-off sound of neighbors laughing and the distant ring of a basketball striking pavement. Every night before bed, he would touch the edges of a worn paperback beside his pillow, the paper softened by so many rereads. The stillness would stretch wide, holding his questions in the quiet where answers felt hidden beneath the surface, each fragment of memory. Letters arriving in blue ink from Kenya, the sound of utensils on dinner plates, the feel of pressed linen at church on Sundays, carried the weight and comfort of searching. Even in those tender moments, there was always a longing for something not quite found, the comfort of familiar arms, the ache of absence, the sacred, slow assembling of a sense of self. Sometimes, when doubts crept in, he'd remember watching his mother sort papers late into the night, her hand resting on his shoulder, steady and unwavering, as if to say, "You are not lost here. You are being gathered piece by piece, even when you do not see it." And in this gentle rhythm, a kind of balancing began, not whole, not broken, but remembering, the spirit drawn back through the fragments, learning to move patiently, like tracing a path through the dark by feel, not sight. Outside, night stretched over the city, hush settling around every window. The world was wide, mysterious, unfinished. Yet in the slow, silent minutes, a soul quietly found shape. There's a memory of a wooden table in a small apartment in Honolulu. The sun has slipped behind the palms outside, and the windows are half open to let in the island's evening air. At that table, a boy presses the side of his face to the cool grain, feeling the wood beneath his cheek. The apartment isn't silent. There's the faint clatter of cutlery, the hush of slippers moving lightly across worn tile. His grandmother, Madeline, always seems to be moving with quiet purpose. She sorts papers in the lamplight, methodical and patient, her hands steady from years spent at her bank job. When she glances at him, it's often with a half smile, not trying to interrupt his thoughts, just checking if he needs something, offering care through the warmth of routine gestures, folding a shirt, pouring tea, leaving the porch light on. Stanley, his grandfather, is louder, filling the small rooms with cigar smoke and stories about Kansas prairies. Evenings, he sometimes sits with the boy as dusk settles, turning the pages of a well-thumbed newspaper, tapping a finger over headlines from the mainland. Sometimes they talk, but just as often they sit in weathered silence, letting the sound of a ceiling fan mix with the low murmur of distant traffic. The world beyond these walls feels far away, yet the rituals of home carry their own kind of gravity. Bare feet slide along the cool linoleum in the kitchen as the kettle whistles, a small but constant rhythm. At Punahou School, days are structured and bright, full of chalk dust and sunlight on sidewalks. He slips notebooks into his backpack, lining up his pencils in a practiced row. The bell rings, and he walks out into the careful order of classrooms, where the air smells faintly of eucalyptus and copy paper. Here, Barak learns to wait for moments of silence, the pause between questions, the hush before basketball practice. Even after the clatter of the day, the quiet at home always feels different. In these adolescent years, every shuffle on carpet, every soft lamp switched on, becomes a thread in a larger fabric. The values in this household are not spoken in sermons, but lived out in habits, early mornings, handwritten letters from his mother, grocery lists on the fridge. There's no sense of needing to impress anyone, just a gentle discipline, a belief that showing up again and again matters more than any burst of brilliance. It's inside these plain rituals that spiritual stillness takes root. Ordinary rooms, window frames chipped from salt air, kitchen towels worn soft by use. These details don't make headlines, but they carry the slow weight of formation. Under this roof, greatness has yet to make itself known. It arrives quietly, shaped by the patience of those who keep tending the small things, long after the world has turned away for the night. In the shadow of the kitchen's waning light, Barack Obama's footsteps settled onto old, creaking floorboards, the quiet hum of the refrigerator and distant city sounds mixed with the scrape of his chair as he sat across from Michelle, sometimes saying nothing for long stretches. The world outside, with its sharp expectations, faded to the steady presence of sticky fingerprints on tabletops and the warm tang of children's laughter down the hall. There was no need for urgency, not here. He listened, and the simple gravity of listening seemed heavier than all the words he had spoken to crowds. Family, for Barak, wasn't a showcase. It was a gentle practice. Toothbrushes shared a dangling cup near the sink, a row of shoes clustered near the door. Many evenings blurred into one another, Malia studying on the carpet, Sasha's sounds from the next room, until the pattern of their days became its own quiet call to presence. Like the measured movements of a tea ceremony, there was discipline beneath the repetition. Meal after meal, routine after routine. The practice was not in the grand gestures, but in the restraint. Loving most fully by holding back, letting space open between moments so that each could breathe. The truth is, most growth unfolded here, in the hush between family chores. Lifting a stack of folded laundry to one child's room, Barak felt the ordinary weight of care and noticed the way the light angled through the doorway, amber and soft. These were unremarkable minutes, but they gathered into something enduring. To see a family member not as an extension of oneself, but as a curriculum, each person their own unfolding, with their own unseen questions, with their own gifts. He learned silently to wait, to offer presence instead of correction, to trust the slowness as a kind of wisdom, growing not through what he imposed, but through what he allowed. It was restraint, not in stubborn silence, but in stepping aside so that someone else could speak. It meant bowing out of arguments once urgent, choosing instead the patient act of setting the table, pouring water, noticing the quiet. Evening after evening, he was trained by these cycles, not just to lead, but to be led by the invisible teachings inside family life. The tea was not always hot enough, the dishes not always put away. Sometimes the sharpness of fatigue crept in, but the rhythm held, breath deepening, posture loosening, the smallest glances carrying their own understanding. A family, he came to see, could be a sanctuary for learning the art of being. Not achievement, not ambition, but restraint, holding back so love could reveal itself in patient attendance. The lesson was never complete, but every repetition brought him closer. The years were not a straight line, but a spiral returning again and again to these rooms, this kitchen, the unfinished heart of home, learning to hold others tenderly without making them mirrors. In this space, Barak slipped further from the center. He became a witness as well as a father, a student as well as a partner, and the quiet work continued, just as the world outside hurried on, unknowing. A slow dusk settled over the Nairobi airport, pale light faded on the tiles beneath Barak's shoes. He stood with his hands tucked deep in his pockets, listening to the low hum of distant voices and the rolling rattle of suitcases on uneven linoleum. The air was thick and unfamiliar, carrying the smell of diesel, dust, and red earth. He tried to steady his breath, feeling it catch against nerves unused to so much waiting. Each inhale was a small act of listening, trying to ground himself in this new place, half known, half distant. He carried his papers, a sheaf of crumpled tickets, the well-used pages of his notebook, a travel-worn paperback. The texture of the paper against his palm was a reminder. He had come for answers, but the questions were lighter here, more silent. Outside, the sun had slipped behind the city, painting the clouds in a dull orange that lingered on his trousers, his open shirt collar, his tired eyes. Even as he stepped further into the Kenyan evening, surrounded by strangers whose faces sometimes seemed to echo his own, there was a quiet ache, an ache that felt older than he was, the ache of an unfilled space, a space shaped by missing stories. He followed the sound of radio static in the taxi, the driver's hands working the cracked steering wheel. The seat fabric was rough against his elbows. He stared at the streets through dust-filmed glass, letting Nairobi unfold in slow, unfinished images. Tin rooftops, children darting through alleys, the soft, rhythmic sweep of women's skirts against concrete. He pressed his head lightly to the window and watched darkness gather, thick and patient. In every movement, checking the folded letter in his bag, tracing the shape of a faded photograph, running a thumb along the edge of his wallet, he searched for connection. Each detail of his father's world came in fragments, a name, a place, a gesture borrowed from a distant relative. He held these clues gently, afraid that chasing them too quickly might scatter them further. The next morning, the smell of strong tea drifted through a guest house courtyard. Barak sat with both hands wrapped around a mug, feeling the warmth seep into his palms. A rooster called somewhere, and leaves fluttered lazily above his head, catching the gold of the new sun. He opened his notebook, wanting answers to spill across the page, but only silence came. The paper stayed mostly empty. He listened to it, respecting the pause, honoring the stillness between words. He moved slowly through his father's village, walking worn paths lined with red soil and the sharp scent of morning dew. Each step unsettled a memory he didn't fully own. Shoes gathering dust, shirt sticking softly to his shoulders. He watched others greet each other with laughter or quiet murmurs, longing to be claimed by those easy gestures. But he remained on the edge, present but not rooted, each moment asking him how to belong. There was no sudden clarity here, only patient, aching search. In every handshake or shared meal, beans on tin plates, warm chapati, water splashed from a shared basin, Barak felt the border between himself and his father's world soften just a little. He attended to the small rituals, folding a blanket, lifting a mug, closing his notebook at night so the pages would not wrinkle in the damp air. There was comfort in that repetition, a quiet grounding that let loneliness settle without bitterness, just as evening settled slowly through the slats of the guest house window, painting gentle shadows across the floor, keeping the ache company until sleep finally came. He sits quietly, pen pressed gently to the yellow page, the faint creak of his chair beneath him, the hush of the house after everyone else has gone to bed. The lamplight is low, golden, brushing over the familiar lines of the legal pad. It's here in the silence, just a circle of warm light on the table, the rest of the world blurred into darkness, where the ache rises up, not sharp but steady, not a wound but a room. Sometimes he taps the end of his pen against the cardboard back, the motion grounding him in this moment, this body. And beneath the work, the words, revisions, the tracing of ideas across paper, there's that old emptiness, the space where a father's story should be. The distance is not new. Even in his childhood, the rare letters from Kenya, the photos stamped with foreign heat, the phone calls that wandered, always ended with something missing in this hour. With only the ticking clock and breath for company, the longing returns. It isn't sadness exactly. It's the awareness of the shape of what was never filled. He writes a line, crosses it out, pauses. This is union, too, the meeting of presence with absence. The yellow pad is a vessel waiting for the ink, but also bearing the emptiness that gives words their meaning. His hand rests on the page, feeling the texture, thin, almost translucent, yet solid enough to carry memory. Here in the hush, the quiet ache becomes a companion. He does not chase it away. He lets it settle in, like the thin wool of a favorite sweater stretched over his shoulders. Not quite warmth, not quite comfort, but familiar. A reminder. This ache isn't just his, though it lives in the old photos, in the boxes of letters, in the deep chords of memory. It's older than him, older than any one story. Sometimes, looking at the soft reach of his own hand in lamplight, he senses others across time. Others who have written in the stillness, their longing an open room where something sacred might enter. There are lines he writes and erases, then writes again, as if the act itself repairs a thread. Ink as a form of longing, paper as what cannot be filled. The chair shifts beneath him. Night presses closer to the windows. He listens to the silence, letting the ache expand until it's no longer personal, just the ordinary sadness that runs through so many lives, fathers who stay, fathers who leave, fathers who vanish before they're ever known. The ache becomes softer here, loosening its grip. It's what makes legacy possible, he thinks, the hollow that calls to be filled, the missing vessel that beckons spirit across generations. So he lets the yearning rest beside him like another page in the pad quietly turned. There is no shame in its presence, and he goes on writing, not to fill the void, but to honor it, to give the ache its place at the table. As the lamplight pools wider, he remembers that emptiness is not nothingness, but a space meant for something gentle, something sacred enough to wait for truth. The night slips forward. He does not rush it. There is a kind of belonging found here in what's missing, a quiet peace in letting longing linger, as steady and real as the weight of the pen in his hand. A scratch of pen on parchment-colored paper fills the quiet of a small room, low lamplight pushing the edges of the shadows away. Years before the glow of the world's cameras, Barack Obama sits at a worn desk in Chicago, a mug half full of tea cooling at his elbow. He looks out the window to the haze of city lights, the hush of traffic beyond Lake Michigan's hold. Here, among scattered folders and the soft creak of old apartment floorboards, his early organizing days unfold, where passion often met bureaucracy and ambition learned patience. His hands sought through door-knocking lists, the kind printed on rough stock that rasps against the fingertips. Names and addresses make up his new world. He walks stairwells, feet steady on chipped tile, each step carrying the weight of hope and uncertainty. The scent of old wood lingers, mixed with the closeness of hallway dust. Around him, every building seems to hold its particular rhythm of life, the echo of children's laughter, the murmur of tired neighbors, and the silence pulled tight by resignation. Evenings arrive with a slow descent. The light over his dining table softens, pooling on yellow legal pads covered in crossed-out lines and restless arrows. Some nights, after long meetings in church basements, the air tinged with coffee and old hymnals, Obama lets his mind circle the edges of defeat. Small victories feel undone by bigger refusals, funding lost, alliances fractured, a phone that never rings back. Quietly, he watches the lines of his handwriting drift and tangle, the blue ink thinning where he pressed too soft. Not everything is meant to work out right away. In the late 90s, the heat of summer lingers in community halls, humming fans barely stirring the thick air. Barack revisits campaign notebooks, margin notes filled with reminders. Call so-and-so, follow up, revise speech. Some notes remain incomplete. Others bloom into feedback scribbled by hand from friends and volunteers. The paper holds fatigue, but also a record of longing. How deeply he wants change, how often doors close before they open. In between, he learns to listen more than convince, to let silence fill the spaces after someone voices disappointment. Sometimes, the quiet itself is a kind of truth. His first forays into broader politics bridge hope with awkwardness. The memory of failed runs, good intentions stalled at the edge of precinct maps and political calculus, stays folded among yard signs stacked in a hallway closet. He picks at a cracked mug, staring at his reflection in a window gone dark. This pause, deep and uncertain, settles in the space where the inner world meets the outer. He begins to see that legacy is carried most quietly in the missed chances and the unfinished lists. Breathing in, he listens to the room's hush, the muted rattle of a passing L train in the distance. Here, before turning out the lamp, he starts again, writing new names, new plans in careful, even script, soft enough not to wake his family. No headline, no instant recognition. Just a man steadily moving toward something he cannot quite name yet, letting the losses gather softly until they begin to resemble a new kind of foundation. Barack Obama's hand rests on the cool surface of a hotel desk, yellow legal pad angled just so beneath the soft gold of a travel lamp. Long past the hours when applause has faded, he lingers with pen in hand, letting lines run half-finished, unhurried. There is a hush here, a hush not just of a stranger's room and the faint hum of air conditioning, but of what it means to sit with shortcomings. Each mistake, each political setback or misspoken word seems to come home to roost on wide-ruled paper. The tip of his pen hesitates. Ink waits. It is quiet enough to notice his own breathing, the catch at the top of the inhale, the letting go. In these hours, setbacks are re-examined not to dissect, but to soften, to see if, in the darkness and the lack of answers, something will begin to reorder itself gently. Ordinary paper, the kind you buy in a pack, becomes a place where disappointments are honored, where they are neither erased nor inflated, but simply seen. There is calm in giving silence to wounds. With each line, he remembers how election nights are sometimes followed by empty rooms, how speeches receive both cheers and silence, and how silence can last longer. The lamp casts the color of honey on wood veneer, the air tinged with legal pad pulp and quiet courage. The rhythm is not to solve, but to outlast, to watch as the sting of a public stumble transforms, night after night, through simple repetition. The act of showing up with the same pen, the same pads, a different mood. This is the gentle adjustment of a soul calibrating across time. He lets his mind wander into those early moments in Chicago, community meetings where voices rose, tempers flared, and newness stung. It was failure that whispered correction, redirecting his approach, revising assumptions not just outwardly, but within. Even here, older and with more years behind him, that pattern continues. Each time life didn't go as planned, a bill lost, a partnership frayed, became another small moment for reflection under lamplight. The window glass cools as the night deepens. He glances outward, nothing moving but a wisp of tree branch, almost imperceptible unless you wait. In these intervals, the sacred patience emerges, not to rewrite the past, but to feel how nothing real inside him was ever threatened by outcomes. Lost campaigns, hard headlines, fractured trust. These are only invitations to return to the writing table, to look again and again until the sharpness dulls and the edges soften. It is not right away. Sometimes, even with the lamplight, the room feels dim. The page fills slowly, a few words at a time, pauses longer than sentences. Through failure, there is gentle revision, not erasure, never denial, but a willingness to see the story differently with each returning dusk. Each correction is quiet, nearly invisible, happening in the shift of his posture, the weight of his hand, the acceptance of unfinished thoughts. What turning point means to him is not a single moment, but the cumulative mercy of many moments revisited. A quiet unfolding, each layer seen again with wider vision. Shadows gather on the walls, soundless. There is no audience but the self that watches. The pad receives every attempted line, every abandoned phrase, and nothing is wasted. Failures are not locked away. They become gentle lessons only with time, only in stillness, only when approached with reverence for their place in a larger unfolding. The lamp's glow persists, bearing witness as Obama allows himself once more to calibrate quietly, unhurried, trusting that what is truly real in him can wait and will remain through the gentle repetition of every night spent here. A hotel desk under a low lamp, the glow settling into the edge of a yellow legal pad. Barack Obama's handwriting fills the lines, careful and even, every stroke measured. The room holds a hush, heavy with day's residue. Suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. Outside, city lights blink slow and indifferent. Inside, the ritual is steady. He turns a page. The soft rasp of paper against his palm. He pauses to breathe, letting thoughts arrange into order. Practice shapes every action here. The curl of a letter, the listing of points, the old contentment of pen to paper instead of keyboard. Writing for the law was always about clarity, precision, and an honesty of logic. Hours at the Harvard Law Review, tracing arguments, editing footnotes with a kind of quiet devotion. Back then, the world shrunk to the size of margins, and margins became a kind of mirror. Write, then reread. Cross out, then try again. There was no room for shortcuts, only the calm certainty of revision. Each word tested by the light of reason and the weight of consequence. The legal habits never left him. Years later, when drafting, organizing scripts, he would slip into that familiar rhythm, pen gliding in spirals on a fresh page. Scripts for door-to-door outreach, for meetings in church halls and crowded back offices. Each phrase chosen so that it could be spoken, not just read. The ring of truth mattered in a room more than on a page. Faint aroma of old wood tables, the sharp edge of coffee cooling in a paper cup nearby. Sometimes he would pause and think of the people who would hear these words, ordinary members, unsure or hopeful, hearing his writing voiced by someone not himself. The habit of drafting policy arrived later, slow and deliberate, a drawing out of lines, sections numbered by hand before typewriters replaced pens. It took patience to clarify a concept, patience sharpened by endless trial and repetition. Handwriting made the work tactile, seeing corrections, lines struck through but dimly visible, nothing erased, only built over. He kept folders of drafts, creased and annotated, some with coffee stains, some with corners folded down. Practice was repetition, not glamorous, sometimes barely noticed, but each cycle made a difference. He found something spiritual in this repetition, taking disordered hopes or complex ideas and refining them until they could survive scrutiny. There was humility in each draft, a true acceptance that initial words are rarely enough. Revision invited him to listen, first to the page, then to the quiet inside. He carried this stillness with him. It gave shape to policy and direction to speech, but it also carved out a space for reflection. The process held him, inviting steady patience that would carry from one role to another, unchanged. There is an old hotel room. The walls are painted in a pale shade that drifts toward gray in the half-light, somewhere quietly between the world of movement and its pause. On the desk sits Barack Obama's yellow legal pad, edges curled from use, pages faintly imprinted by the pressure of thoughts repeated night after night. The scent of paper and ink hovers faintly, almost lost beneath the cleaner's distant trace of lemon and linen. Each page carries the soft marks of a hand well acquainted with starting again, right beneath a dim desk lamp that hums gently to itself on its lowest setting. The chair is wooden, a little unsteady on the right side. When he sits, there is a hush, only the shuffle of his sleeve, the steady settling of his breath. His pen does not rush. Each word finds the surface patiently. He recopies sentences. Sometimes he is unsatisfied with a phrase or a turn, so the pad gathers crossed out lines and reworked thoughts. Days where sentences were rebuilt not for show, but for some silent rhythm within. Mastery in this space offers little ceremony, no crowd, no applause, just the silent repetition of the mundane, night after night. He sips cold water from a glass that leaves rings on the table. The condensation beads up, running down the outside in slow rivulets. Each swallow is a quiet interlude. It is a small act, but in the hush of these late hours, the simple movement feels complete, almost sacred. He adjusts the lamp's angle, fully present to its warmth scattering across the legal pad. The grain of the wood beneath his wrist is familiar now, carved with nicks from travelers before him. The world outside these thin curtains is asleep, and he is the last watcher of the day's embers. There are many drafts, handwritten, then typed, then handwritten again. The work is never a performance. The stillness is its own lesson. Just the pulse of repetition, like walking a stone path in the dark, feeling for each step. Over time, this practice becomes a companion. Repetition is not emptiness, it is devotion. The small act, repeated, vibrates through the self. He collects these pages together in a careful stack, aligns the edges, and slides them inside a folder. A soft exhale as he completes one more night's quiet return. Down the hall the clock ticks and he prepares for rest, but the lesson lingers in the senses. Mastery is not an arrival. It is a slow, wordless preparation, a daily returning. Like water on stone, the act shapes the mind, something felt, not forced, movement in stillness, quiet intention across ordinary time. It is late. The lamp is dimmed. And just outside, someone walks quietly down the hallway. Their steps a gentle reminder that the world continues, one quiet rhythm inside another. Legacy here feels like vibration, unhurried, simple, always in patient motion. In the quiet just beyond midnight, a small oval of lamplight rests across his desk, and Barack Obama sits before it, sleeves rolled, a yellow legal pad angled just so, edge tucked slightly beneath his left wrist. The house is heavy with sleep. Even in earlier years, whether deep in a Chicago apartment or after a campaign event, this is when the hush begins. He always preferred the feel of pen on paper. It's a steadying sensation, the weight of the pen, the slight drag of its tip moving through the grooves of the pad, the way ink blooms in blue against the legal yellow. The room grows smaller. Just him, the desk, the faint city hum outside, shut behind thick curtains, each sound muffled by layers of cloth and glass. He takes his time here, starts with a loose outline. Not sentences first, just drifting phrases, fragments. Sometimes in print, habit from law school, sometimes in script, the letters slanting forward. The legal pad offers space for mistakes, lines get crossed out, fresh thoughts stacked along the margins. The act itself becomes a sort of meditative rhythm, the pen moving slower than the mind. Each new sheet is folded neatly beneath the last, the corner edges curled only slightly by his palm's path. A cup of tea sits cooling at arm's reach. The steam traces patterns upon the lamplight, thin swirls fading before they touch anything solid. The bitterness and the warmth bring him back when his focus begins to drift. Every detail in these hours matters. It's in the details that thoughts form shape, not as finished speeches or policies, but as raw intention turning over within him. Paper absorbs doubt. There's less pressure here than in a typed document, fewer expectations, no cursor blinking impatiently. On paper, he listens, first and foremost, to the slow build of his own voice. Fingers cramped sometimes from writing for hours on end, but it's a small pain, and he welcomes it. Behind each page, the quiet grows deeper. He never rushes, pausing, then resuming, always in his own time. What changes when a leader's words are slowed down, forced to materialize shape by shape, before any spectator or spotlight exists. The yellow legal pad, simple and stackable, becomes devotional, holding not just ideas, but the patience to witness them unfold. Each line is a layer of memory relived. Each stroke affirms that rhythm itself is the greatest act of faith a writer can make. A single lamp, the scratch of ink, silence around him, all serving not the audience, not the news cycle, but a hidden devotion to the work of becoming. A thin slice of amber light rests against the edge of Barack Obama's writing desk. The room is emptied of noise and recognition now. Shadows lean longer on the wood. There is nothing to offer the outside world in this moment. Only the soft thumbing of pages, a pencil turning in quiet fingers, the low, silent heartbeat of a house resting past midnight. He adjusts the lamp, shade slightly askew, but enough for golden light to puddle near the margin of his legal pad. Each looped letter, every searching sentence remains unseen, not just unpublished, unshared, unspoken, unknown to anyone else. In this stillness, the great current, public hope, expectation, recedes. Obama lets the silence settle even deeper. He places his palm down on lined yellow paper and breathes softly. No recording devices, no audience to anticipate. What is shaped here is shaped for the sake of being alive and awake before dawn. Behind each word, an invisible labor, a devotion not for display, but for alignment. Through years of travel, hotel rooms dim with the faint glow from city windows, he aligns his soul not by what others receive, but what remains between his breath and the pen. Each night offers a private attendance. The mark of commitment shows in small things, neatly stacked drafts, envelopes tucked under books, discarded cap from a pen found later beneath the chair. Each artifact is quiet testimony, hidden under layers of ordinary life. No one will see the full shape of these moments. No one needs to. That is the quiet sanctity. He moves his notes aside with careful hands. There is solace in tending to what will never be displayed. Pages torn out and thrown away, first thoughts scribbled then abandoned, sentences erased, thoughts left to linger in the shadowed corners of the room. Sometimes he glances upward and holds silence, letting the emptiness gather and sink, safe, undisturbed. It is enough to sit there, glimpsing the hidden light that arrives not to shine for others, but to illuminate the space inside. As the hours drift onward, he does not hurry. Each line, even the unfinished or uncertain, is honored, sacred because it is unseen. The labor is real, but it is not for legacy. It is for truth within him. This interior work, sustained and secret, shapes a truer foundation than anything praised or published. With every slow mark on the legal pad, the weight of leadership softens in the quiet patience of effort no one will ever witness. Sometimes the greatest devotion is the work that remains hidden, tended in the gentle dark, held by quiet hands, admiration set aside, only the inner flame remaining, waiting until morning. The yellow legal pad sits on the desk, edges curled ever so slightly from use, each page pressed down beneath the careful weight of Barack Obama's left hand. The lines are dense with his writing, the page top crowded with a small penciled header, a date, a fragment, sometimes just a word. The lamplight is steady and warm against the wood, tinging every margin gold. It is quiet now. The room, whether tucked away in a Chicago apartment, a borrowed space on the road, or the upstairs solitude of his post-presidency home, is never far from the hush of a background heater or the faint tick of a clock. He pulls his feet underneath him, wearing well-worn socks, careful not to disturb the neat stacks of paper and folders arrayed in deliberate order. Everything on the desk has its place. An uncapped pen, a glass of water, a manila envelope with notes clipped just so hours slip with measured patience. Each sentence is reworked, the pen lifted, then lowered, the tip paused above a questionable word, the line beneath occasionally scratched out with exacting thoroughness. There's a tension, a kind of devotion to correctness, not born of anxiety, but of an internal contract made long ago with self-respect and responsibility. Across the room, a small lamp on a bookshelf pulls light onto a stack of books. Speeches, letters, history, novels in English and Swahili. Sometimes he stands, stretches, then returns and scans the spines for nothing in particular, touching the binding of Baldwin, Mandela, Lincoln, circling back to his narrow orbit before the blank page. The window at his side is nearly silent, save for the occasional hum of passing traffic. In winter, there's a chill that seeps through. In summer, a soft draft lifts the edges of loose paper. Obama's style is not one of wild bursts, but of deliberate, painstaking assembly. Stubborn focus grips him, narrowing the world to the ink, the lamp, and the quiet rhythm of revision. He revisits old passages, sometimes with lips moving, subvocalizing every phrase out loud, testing, listening, searching for the ideal cadence. His perfectionism does not demand flawlessness for its own sake, but seeks that deeper resonance where a passage might carry weight long after the page is closed. A tenderness unknown to many flickers in the pause before the next word comes. There is a rhythm here, narrow, sacred, and steady. The sound of pen against paper repeated until meaning emerges. Each evening is much like the next. The legal pad, the lamplight, the quiet. Genius here is obsession without spectacle, a long, silent labor, concealed within the gentle routine of a man unwilling to let go of a sentence until it shines with his exact intention. Beyond the desk, his family sleeps behind closed doors. Down the hallways, the air is weighted with the hush of consideration. In the slow, careful ritual of rewriting, Obama quietly honors what has come before, preserving the dignity of language and the slowness with which meaning is shaped. Nothing quick, nothing for show. Just the page and the memory of all that might be carried inside it. And in this dusk-lit room, the work continues, slow, obsessive, almost reverent, each word a note in a larger, lifelong composition. It's late, and the room is so still that the pages resting on the desk don't stir when he breathes. After a day lined with handshakes and meetings, the quiet feels almost physical, like an old quilt settled heavy across his shoulders. This is when the lamp's glow gathers in pools on the yellow legal pad, and Barack Obama leans in, pen hovering, his eyes tracing the faint blue lines to steady his mind. His writing becomes a kind of listening, each stroke slow and careful. Sometimes he rewrites the same sentence 3 or 4 times, not because he expects perfection, but because there's something underneath the words, something he's trying to catch. The faint scent of ink settles, mixing with the sharper tang of coffee cooling at his elbow. Outside the window, the city breathes a low and constant hush, beyond the reach of the lamplight, beyond the narrow slice of his world. He has spoken about these nights, the restlessness that calls him to the page long after his family is asleep. How sometimes there's a burden to being singularly focused. In these hours, his hunger feels less like willpower and more like a tide, pulling him back over and over. It is not the performance of genius. It's the ache to understand, to meet himself in the quiet as honestly as he can. This fixation is rarely satisfying in the moment. The desk always ends up scattered with pages, some half finished, some scribbled through. But he stays. The ritual of returning is its own answer. Obsession for him is not something that claims him from without, but something that rises gently from the inside. It's the whisper that asks, is there more to give? The body grows tired, the lamp burns low. But there is peace in the repetition, in writing the same idea differently until it stops echoing and rests. One night in a hotel room, the clock's red numbers blinking, he described his compulsion to write as a spiritual hunger. He wrote to listen to himself, not simply to be understood. He scribbled out lists, drafted phrases, and sometimes just sat, hands cupping the warm ceramic mug. The room smelt faintly of brewed tea and neutral carpet. There were no distractions here, nothing but the silence of his thoughts and the flow from mind to paper. There's a kind of balance being practiced nightly, not pushing away the restless drive, but letting it be part of him, a companion at the desk. Genius in this slow light is not loud. It's the quiet pairing of focus and patience. The hunger and the stillness hold each other. Sometimes the gift is only in the sitting, the letting the mind grow quiet enough that another layer of himself is revealed. The one that listens, the one that waits, the one that trusts that nothing is wasted in these hours. On these nights there is tenderness in obsession, not a race, but a remembering. Each new page, a kind of offering. The coffee grows cold, the outside world fades, and the hush grows deep, but he stays, longing, writing, letting the silence answer him back. There were some evenings when the house was quieter than usual, socks left by the couch, toys abandoned in the soft golden spill from a hallway lamp. While most of the country might picture the thunder of applause or bright stages, Barak would sit with a pen in hand, the distant hum of a dishwasher his only company. The soft pull of yellow legal pad paper, scrawled in his own looping script, steadied him, but it also drew a line between his presence and the rest of the home. The lamp on his desk glowed against the window glass, catching only his reflection and the faint outlines of family photographs, their smiles paused in time. Michelle might be in another room, her faint laughter filtering through walls, or perhaps she, too, had settled into the quiet rituals of her evenings, reading, folding laundry, feeling the press of absence along with the comfort of routine. There were missed dinners, the empty space at the table, a silent tally of ambition's cost. Sometimes the knot of a tie hung loose over his shoulder as he reread something in his own hand, aware of footsteps receding down the hallway, letting go of another night together, letting the soft hush of the house deepen. The air in those hotel rooms at night was different, thinner, unfamiliar. There, Barak would stack hotel stationery beneath his legal pad, the pen's scratch replaced by the distant hum of city traffic. It grounded him in solitude, but it also ached. The rhythm of thinking aloud on paper was faithful, but even the most careful ritual couldn't fill the space where a daughter's voice or his wife's warmth should be. Hotel curtains drawn, lamp dimmed low, the only conversation was with memory and the echo of what was waiting at home. He learned to notice the little things, a mug with lipstick left on the rim, a note tucked beside a lamp, small reminders of connection in the hush that ambition shapes. Each one brought a brief comfort, a gentle regret, folded into the careful act of becoming who he hoped to be. There are things that seem to slip away quietly, not as a sudden loss, but as a thinning thread, the feeling of a child's good night hug, the weight of shared laughter at the day's end. The writing soothed the ache of in-betweenness, yet beneath every paragraph, Barak felt the shape of what was missing. There was no way to rewind a late evening or catch up with a bedtime story when you'd been gone, sometimes weeks, sometimes more. The ink dried, the lamp flicked off, and the room would fall silent but not whole. In the stillness, he remembered the promises he made to raise children who felt truly seen, to be a husband whose absence never outweighed his devotion. Nights spilled into one another, the cost measured not in speeches made, but in evenings missed. Paper and ink could hold dreams or regrets, but they could not tuck in a child or share the warm weight of a hand held in darkness. He knew this trade, the tension between calling and closeness, a lesson gleaned not all at once, but in the lingering loneliness left at the edge of each page written by lamplight, and every so often, when the pen was set aside and the legal pad closed, the emptiness was neither defeat nor punishment, just the gentle, persistent reminder of what matters, quietly lost while chasing what could not be held for long. A glass of water sits near the lamp, half empty, sweat condensing in rings atop a stack of legal pads. Barak's fingers linger on pages he's written and unspoken. Outside the window, the world goes quiet, just the rub of pen on paper now and the soft pulse of breath. There are silences inside every word he lays down. Not absence, but space made by letting go. Friends from years ago, time with his daughters lost in the press of duty, hours vanished behind the shape of sentences. He accepts this in the same way one accepts dusk, its inevitability, the bittersweet hush. Each letter becomes a small act of release, another thing surrendered for something unseen. Lamplight glows on his wrist. The patina of wedding band, slightly worn at its edge, marks time. Michelle's footsteps, remembered more often than heard, form a gentle counterpoint to the night's hush. Sometimes he pauses, feeling her presence even in her absence. The way home is made from what is missed as much as what is held. These moments in solitude are not empty, they are consecrated. Nothing truly meaningful ever arrives without some parting, some ache. Grief is another kind of honoring. He places the pen down, palms pressed together softly. Reflection is not a looking back, but a way of carrying forward what has been left behind. There are yellowed notes in the drawer, fragments of speeches and drafts long set aside. In their quiet fading, there's a kind of nourishment, like soil holding the memory of roots. Air in the room cools as evening deepens. So much has been lost: privacy, time, certain dreams. But in that losing, he has made space for something else to emerge. Growth always asks for something to be given up. The wound allows in the light. Every goodbye, spoken or silent, makes room for a different kind of presence. Letting go, he becomes more whole. The house is still. The page is patient. Even the losses, remembered here in lamplight, hold the quiet promise of what comes next. In the quietness of the years after the presidency, the house settles into evening around Barack Obama. It is not the White House now, but his own home. Rooms with wooden floors that creak as he moves gently, not out of anticipation, but with a steady calm. Outside, the world keeps its pace. Inside, there is the low hum of a lamp, the cool smoothness of a mug in his hand, herbal tea warming his palms as he circles the kitchen once, then twice. Here he is less a headline and more a father, a husband, a man returned to quieter rituals. There are fewer interruptions, and the hours stretch longer. The children, grown now, drift in and out, leaving shoes by the doorway, opening a book for a while, closing it softly before leaving for their own rooms. Family dinners fill the air with the gentle clatter of spoons and memories. Melia's voice, Sasha's laughter, Michelle humming as she washes a dish, the sound of water running over glass and silver. These are the details that linger, settling into the corners like dusk, ordinary, enduring. The table feels worn and welcoming beneath his hands, the grains in the wood marking time. When the night presses in, Obama finds his way to the old desk in his study. The chair is firmer than he remembers from the road and campaign trails, but it is his now. Two yellow legal pads rest atop one another, their pages blushed with lamplight. Pens, a blue one for outlining, a black one for deeper drafts, are lined up along the edge. He sits, letting the silence gather before words form. The routine is slow, almost ceremonial. A straightening of the paper, a sip of tea, a pause to listen for the faint click of the house settling. He writes, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, the pen whispering across the paper. Thoughts drift easily. Reflections on policy become memories of a daughter's school play or a meal shared in a quiet cafe years ago. There is no rush to shape these words now. The need for crisp sentences and perfect cadence softened in retirement. He learns to welcome the mistakes, the hesitations, the half-captured truths, trusting the rhythm of rewriting. Each page becomes a slow layering, a return and return, never quite finished and never forced. The scent of ink sharpens, light falls across his hands, and he remembers that his story, like anyone's, has always been written in patient fragments. In this room, time bends. There is no one schedule to keep, no speech hovering overhead, only the muted ticking of a clock on the mantel. Sometimes he reads over old letters, ones from his mother, notes tucked into travel bags, cards from friends and former colleagues. These pages are textured with fingerprints and smudges, reminders that life is made of what's handled, revised, and returned to again and again. He closes his eyes briefly, hearing not the echo of crowds, but the intimate silence that settles in after everyone else has gone to sleep. Tonight, as every night, the practice continues of remembering, of recording, of making sense of who he has been and who he is becoming. There are no answers given, only the gentle permission to pause and reflect, as if wisdom waits in the space between one line and the next. Aging, he finds, is the softening of expectation, the acceptance that stories do not need to resolve. Legacy is felt most in these unremarkable moments, damp with tea, unpredictable, unfinished, where he allows himself to simply be present, unguarded, enduring. He writes another line, then another, all beneath the lamp's humble glow. A gentle hush gathers in the corner of the study, somewhere between the shifting of old papers and the steady, unseen cadence of Barack Obama's breath. His joints don't move as quickly as they did in his 40s. His fingers pause before starting each line on the yellow legal pad. The room is lit by a single lamp, its glow softened against the bookshelves, holding the slow accumulation of years. A watch rests on the desk, face down. Night deepens beyond the curtained window as the city hums its distant song. The silence now has a fullness. He has learned to respect it. There is no urge to answer every sound, to chase each idea. Aging has emptied some of the crowdedness from his mind, making each moment more complete with less. He breathes out, feeling the chair's fabric beneath him. There is comfort in this small ritual. Legal pad, felt-tip pen, the shuffling of thoughts methodically onto the page. Time bends here, not forward, but wider, as he sits with what will never be said or done. The documents of youth, policy drafts, schedules, urgent requests have fallen away. What remains now is a slower questioning. Not, what should I do? But what is worth attending to? Sometimes he remembers the hotel rooms, the dusk falling over foreign streets. Older now, he feels less compelled to announce his presence. The humility of elderhood has become his inward service. In the stillness, he senses the lives he cannot touch, the problems unfixable by file or signature. There is grace in his acceptance of unknowing. A sip of cool water steadies him. He watches the lamplight filter through the rim of the glass. In these late hours, writing is less for the world and more for the soul, a private reckoning, a silent conversation with the unfolding present. Each word is a step toward greater presence. The stories he keeps are no longer for applause, but for the simple wholeness of being. There is no bitterness in letting go of the titles, the rooms that once waited for his arrival. Elderhood, he knows, is not about accumulation, but becoming shelter for the younger, an invisible kind of leadership. The warmth in the room is not from heat, but from a deeper surrender. He is an old tree in the late afternoon, a canopy, steady and silent, learning that service, in these years, means to witness, to listen, to let be. The crowded days are memory. Now he finds enough in the laughter from another room, the creak of wood as someone passes down the hall. Aging is quieter than it seems from afar. Inside, it is a ripening, soft but certain, a stillness that speaks of all that no longer needs to be proven. Soon he will set the pen down, hearing only the hush that follows. There is service still, but it is hidden, an inner offering, wordless and whole, carried through the unhurried hours until dawn. There are nights so quiet that even the scrape of a pen cap on paper feels profound. In the gentle glow of the lamp, Barack Obama stretches across the bed, limbs long and tired, yellow legal pad balanced just beneath his elbow. The sheets are cool tonight, their carton edges smoothed down with an absent hand. Through the half-open window, city air mingles with the faintest trace of garden outside. Pens line up on the nightstand. Some never run quite the same after a flight. The ink thickens, or they start to skip midway through a thought. He checks the tip on the back of a receipt before turning back, a quiet ritual. On nights like this, the world outside seems to pause, like time is waiting for him to dream a new shape for it. The room is suspended in that liminal hour after midnight, when silence blurs into the hum of distant traffic. He glances across a scattering of scrolled-over pages, drafts abandoned or turned over like stones along a riverbed. The ceiling fan pushes lazy circles of air overhead, stirring the edges of the papers. There is nothing urgent about this hour, only the gentle presence of ideas too large to finish, visions that roll out, wide and unfinished, across the expanse of those yellow lines. He lets himself drift, eyes soft, pencil rolling between his fingers. Dreams rarely arrive in clean paragraphs. They seep in sideways, pressing against the ribs, hitching his breath. He thinks back to all the strange rooms he has called home. Hotels lit with pale blue bulbs, college dorms creaking with radiators, the house in Hyde Park before it was filled with children's laughter. Every space carried its own silence, every surface a witness to his wrestling with impossible hopes. Tonight he is not president, not a candidate, just a man listening for a thread of vision fragile in the hush. Sometimes the hardest thing is to hold on to a sense of possibility when the news is heavy, when progress is slow, when even words stall. He allows himself to imagine anyway. That is the rhythm, the old companion. The willingness to lean toward a future as yet unspoken, to let longing fill the cool air while the rest of the world is sleeping. The legal pad grows heavier with stray thoughts, single lines, tentative beginnings, half-whispered promises. He isn't chasing answers, only witnessing what arrives in the open quiet. At times, all he can do is trust that even imperfect hopes matter, that in the layering of dreams and doubts and late-night awakenings, something tender is preserved, waiting for dawn. In the hush of another evening, Barak leans again upon the shape of his battered legal pad, its pages fanned out across the desk, the soft lamplight tracing a faint gold along each ruled line, like a thin thread pulling from the present into memory. The gentle drag of pen on paper is all that fills the room for a long moment. No urgent words or press releases, just the quiet pulse of thought sinking deeper. Outside, the windows reflect only him, double exposures of face and hand, night folding itself over the city, vast and silent. The smell of graphite and aged yellow paper rises every so often, stirring something familiar, like stepping through a door he's walked through countless times before. Each line he writes feels less like invention and more like a return. Behind the act of writing, behind the tasks and schedules, behind the signature itself, there is an interior vision, persistent and soft. It is not a fantasy or wishful thinking. It lives at the edge of his awareness, beyond even words. Sometimes, as his hand pauses, Barak lets his gaze trail the grain of the desk, tracing what was left by years of other hands, other pens. Here, memory and imagination blend quietly. He recalls moments from his childhood, the muslin curtains at his grandmother's house, the sound of distant rain on the glass, and these quiet textures seem to shape the contours of his next sentence, as if the past had never really ended, but lived still beneath each present decision. He knows by now that vision isn't a sudden bolt, but a slow, persistent presence. Something he learned in hotel rooms, head bent over bills and drafts, and again in the sanctuaries of late-night offices. This vision comes on softly, sometimes asking for nothing but his willingness to sit with it. In stillness, the boundary between what was and what could be feels thin, more like the gentle overlap of dreams and waking. He's learned through years spent in study and silence that to see the future is not so different from remembering. The notes he writes are less plans, more recollections of truth he knows but hasn't fully voiced, as if the world he hopes for is already held, waiting just beyond the next line. The tick of the clock is slow and patient. The carpet underfoot anchors him, one thread after another, woven through footsteps early and late. Barak breathes, slow and even, letting the next thought come, not pulled by effort, but welcomed. He knows now gently that within every vision there sits memory, the soul's memory, a remembering not of something gone, but of what still quietly calls to be brought into form. The lamplight stays steady. The room is unchanged. Only the space inside is different now, deeper, softer, as if some interior door has clicked open. He writes, and in the writing remembers. And in remembering, the future steps nearer, patient, already breathing in the room, waiting for its time to be said aloud. Barak sits in the far corner of a quiet room. The table is plain, the grain in the wood catching just enough of the lamp to remind him he's not dreaming. Outside, the street is distant, traffic barely a hush. Inside, night folds over him, slow and private. Leather soles press softly into the soft rug. He can feel the chill, not bone deep, just enough to keep his mind alert. The yellow legal pad waits, empty square beside the closed laptop, pen at rest as though it too is holding its breath. The world's expectations linger beyond these walls, but here, for a moment, there's only the measured hush of his own breathing. Fax paper, briefing folders, the heavy snap of a binder being opened. These are scattered along the desk's edge, but he lets them be. He picks up the mug, old and worn around the rim, once a gift. Steam drifts in the narrow light, curling just under his chin before fading away. He cradles the mug in both hands, grounding himself in its warmth. Each sip softens the noise of the day, slightly dulling the silent background drum of what's still unfinished. He watches the sweep of the clock, second hand ticking, a gentle click, reminding him that time moves both with and without him. In between each tick, memory wells up. The silent car rides, the faces behind every decision, the cost of stepping forward or pausing. Sometimes the simplest choices, getting up to pace the hallway, staring at patterns in the ceiling, become rituals of steadying himself against the swell of doubt. Body anchored to the chair, he feels present, but the mind always wanders first through the fog of conscience before any answer appears. Most nights, no one interrupts. His phone rests upside down on the empty plate beside half-eaten toast. Shadows pool in the corners. He listens, not for news or advice, but for the soft arrival of clarity, a clearing in the dense groves of duty and consequence. Here, before he reaches for his pen, the stillness is sharpest. Moments stretch, ink refusing to move until he's sure enough that what stirs inside is truly his own. The pain of responsibility works its way into every muscle, shoulders heavy from holding what no one else can carry, hands cold from holding still too long. Breath, lamp glow, the outline of curtains billowing occasionally, earth brown and weighty. These are his companions in the descent. Nothing is decided yet. The page is still blank, invitation and burden folded into one. He sometimes stands, feeling the ache in his knees. The carpet gives slightly beneath his steps. He stands by the window, hand resting on a cool sill, and watches the muted lights of the city. Out there, in quiet apartments and empty intersections, life goes on with no awareness of the turning point being lived here, unseen. He exhales, eyes lingering on reflections in the window, seeing his own outline blend with the dark beyond. Even as president, surrounded by constant counsel, there are thresholds that must be crossed alone. While decisions are rarely pure, the silence allows him to remember why he keeps returning to this practice, to sit, to wait, to ask himself again what remains sacred inside him, even as the world asks for certainty. The lamp will glow long into the night, tracing his outline across the stacks of folded correspondence, cast-off ties, rumpled jacket. Before anything is written, soul descends, dark and gentle, waiting with him until words finally agree to surface. In the hush before morning, a lamp still glows at Barack Obama's desk. Pages rest in uneven stacks. The legal pad edges are feathered from nights like this, corners bent under the slow drag of a palm. His hand, broad yet steady, lingers above the word he just finished. Pen clicks softly. There is no applause here, only the faint hum of heating through air vents, a dog's breathing from the next room, and the quiet certainty of paper waiting to accept more. The room carries old coffee, earthy, faintly bitter, mixed with traces of aftershave on his sleeve and the slight musk of leather from a well-used chair. Sunlight still feels far away, yet the silence holds. Sometimes the sentences arrive heavy. Thoughts unravel under a rough thumb, stalling. The pause can stretch for minutes. Barak looks at the window, black glass, only his reflection. Underneath the headlines and expectations, there's the memory of tasks unfinished, promises not kept exactly as he wished. He leans back, lets his breath leave slowly. Each inhale is cool. Each exhale seems to soften the world a little. Descent is not defeat, neither in scripture nor in experience. When the world's noise peels away in the small hours, all that's left is the interior. He writes a phrase, scratches half away. The voice inside goes quieter, returning to what he knows. The steady rhythm of the routine, the friction of ink on paper, gravity holding him still. There's humility in meeting one's own shadow, accepting the ordinary contours of another long night. In Kabbalistic wisdom, falling is not failing. The soul descends so it can gather something forgotten, tucked away in the dark. Sometimes the descent, the sinking, opens a deeper channel. Barak sits with the discomfort, the not yet finished. He lays the pen down. Cool air touches the hairs on his forearm. He doesn't try to rise or escape the weight. There is a kind of sacredness in resting with the question, letting the midnight hold him instead of rushing to resolve. Most changes come quietly, their roots spreading beneath the surface. In the stillness, he returns to the practice, scribbles, waits. The legal pad is marked by his patience now, lines crossed, notes added, a date written in the margin. It is not the speech itself that carries him, but the repeated act of showing up, even when unsure. Dissent